Well, I think as you've begun to hear, there are two very different kinds of conversations we could have here. We can talk about religion as it is, for most people most of the time, and we can talk about what religion could be, or should be, or perhaps what it is for the tiniest minority of people. And I just want you to be aware of the difference there, because it could get lost. It's true that some people define God as pure consciousness, or as being synonymous with the laws of nature. But if we talk about consciousness and the laws of nature, we won't be talking about the God that most of our neighbors believe in, which is a personal God who hears our prayers and occasionally answers them. So I just want you to be sensitive to this, because if Michael or I say something derogatory about Islam or Christianity, which seems possible, the response from the other side shouldn't mention quantum mechanics. And it shouldn't reference a notion of God that is so denuded of doctrine as to more or less be synonymous with pure mystery or pure information or pure energy or pure anything. So I wanted to plant a flag there where you all can see it. Because the God that our neighbors believe in is essentially an invisible person. He is a creator deity who created the universe to have a relationship with one species of primate. Lucky us. and he's got galaxy upon galaxy to attend to, but he's especially concerned with what we do, and he's especially concerned with what we do while naked. And he almost certainly disapproves of homosexuality. And he's created this cosmos as a vast laboratory in which to test our powers of credulity. And the test is this: can you believe in this God on bad evidence? Which is to say, on faith. And if you can, you will win an eternity of happiness after you die. And it's precisely this sort of God and this sort of scheme that you must believe in if you're going to have any kind of future in politics in this country. No matter what your gifts. I mean, you could be an unprecedented genius. You could look like George Clooney. You could have $1 billion, and you could have the social skills of Oprah. And you are going nowhere in politics in this country unless you believe in that sort of God. So we can talk about anything we want. I'm happy to talk about consciousness. But please notice that when we migrate away from the God that is really shaping human events, or the God talk that is really shaping human events in our world at this moment.
I think the best way to address the compatibility of science and religion is in the person of Francis Collins. I don't know if you know him. He ran the Human Genome Project for the U.S. He's a medical geneticist, obviously a scientist with a great career in science, and he's also an evangelical Christian. And he's written a book entitled The Language of God, where he claims to square his evangelical Christianity with the last 50 years of molecular biology and argue successfully that God exists. We know this based on scientific principles, and Jesus is his son. Now, I can't say that he's not a scientist, but what I can say is that the place in his book where he tells you when his doubts were truly removed, his conversion experience, testifies to the way the human mind can be partitioned, where a scientist can lapse in the most egregious way in terms of his scientific standards. And because the passage goes like this: I was hiking in the Cascade Mountains and came upon a beautiful frozen waterfall, and my doubts were removed, and I fell to my knees in the dewy grass and surrendered myself to Christ. It's virtually verbatim. So now I would suggest to you that it should be obvious to all of you, and it certainly should have been obvious to Francis Collins, that if a frozen waterfall can testify to the divinity of Jesus, anything can mean anything. He said he actually elaborated on this point. In an interview for Time magazine, he said the waterfall was frozen in 3 streams, and this put him in the mind of the Trinity. Okay, this is psychotic thinking in any other context.
Now, many of you might worry that the notion of well-being is truly undefined and seemingly perpetually open to be reconstrued. And so then how, therefore, can there be an objective notion of well-being? Well, consider by analogy the concept of physical health. I mean, the concept of physical health is undefined, as we just heard from Michael Spector. It has changed over the years. When this statue was carved, the average life expectancy was probably 30. Okay, it's now around 80 in the developed world. There may come a time when we meddle with our genomes in such a way that not being able to run a marathon at age 200 will be considered a profound disability. You know, people send you donations when you're in that condition. Notice that the fact that the concept of health is open, genuinely open for revision, does not make it vacuous. Okay, the distinction between a healthy person and a dead one is about as clear and consequential as any we make in science. Now, another thing to notice is there may be many peaks on the moral landscape. There may be equivalent ways to thrive. Okay, there may be equivalent ways to organize a human society so as to maximize human flourishing. Now, why wouldn't this undermine an objective morality? Well, think of how we talk about food. I would never be tempted to argue to you that there must be one right food to eat. There's clearly a range of materials that constitute healthy food. But there's nevertheless a clear distinction between food and poison. Okay, the fact that there are many right answers to the question, what is food, does not tempt us to say that there are no truths to be known about human nutrition. Now, many people worry that a universal morality would require moral precepts that admit of no exceptions. So, for instance, if it's really wrong to lie, it must always be wrong to lie. And if you can find an exception, well, then there's no such thing as moral truth. Now, why would we think this? Consider, by analogy, the game of chess. Now, if you're going to play good chess, a principle like don't lose your queen is very good to follow. Okay, but it clearly admits of exceptions. I mean, there are moments where losing your queen is a brilliant thing to do. There are moments where it's the only good thing you can do. And yet, chess is a domain of perfect objectivity. The fact that there are exceptions here does not change that at all. Now, this brings us to the sorts of moves that people are apt to make in the moral sphere. Okay? Consider the great problem of women's bodies. What to do about them? Well, this is one thing you can do about them. You can cover them up. Now, it is the position, generally speaking, of our intellectual community that, while we might not like this, we might think of this as wrong in Boston or Palo Alto. Who are we to say that the proud denizens of an ancient culture are wrong to force their wives and daughters to live in cloth bags? I mean, who are we to say even that they're wrong to beat them with lengths of steel cable or throw battery acid in their faces if they decline the privilege of being smothered in this way? Okay, well, who are we not to say this? Who are we to pretend that we know so little about human well-being that we have to be non-judgmental about a practice like this? I'm not talking about voluntary wearing of a veil. I mean, women should be able to wear whatever they want, as far as I'm concerned. But what does voluntary mean in a community where, when a girl gets raped, her father's first impulse, rather often, is to murder her out of shame? Just let that fact detonate in your brain for a minute. Your daughter gets raped, and what you want to do is kill her. What are the chances that represents a peak of human flourishing? Now, to say this is not to say that we have got the perfect solution in our own society. I mean, for instance, this is what it's like to go to a newsstand almost anywhere in the civilized world. Now, granted, for many men, it may require a degree in philosophy to see something wrong with these images. but if we are in a reflective mood, we can ask, is this the perfect expression of psychological balance with respect to variables like youth and beauty in women's bodies? I mean, is this the optimal environment in which to raise our children? Probably not. Okay, so perhaps there's some place on the spectrum between these two extremes that represents a place of better balance.
One reader writes, I think there is a big barrier to getting across rationalist, atheist, free-thinking arguments against religion. And it's the fact that religious people generally think that they and their religion are doing good things for good reasons, even when they're actually doing horrible things. For instance, oppressing women and homosexuals, spreading lies about contraception, hindering scientific progress, etc. So how can we even hope to get across to them the damage that their views cause when they think they're actually being good and being motivated by good reasons, and that we're the ones who are wrong? So it's a good question. It points to the fact that most people, most of the time, are actually motivated to be good. I mean, it's not there are a lot of evil mustache-twirling people who think that they're consciously aware that they're being evil and just wanting to harm people. As Steven Weinberg, the physicist, pointed out, good people, without religion, good people will still be good, bad people will still be bad, but to get good people to do bad things, that often requires religion. I think that's often true, that nowhere do we see people, good people, normal people, people who really do love their kids and people who really do want to live in good societies, do needlessly stupid things that cause immense amounts of human misery, but for religion and its otherworldly motives. It's just it manages to subvert very simple projects and drain away energy that could be used for creating a better life in this world in a way that I think would be unimaginable but for any other ideology. And so what to do about this? I think really there really are only two things we can do. We have to undermine the truth claims of religion. We have to call into question the beliefs that motivate good people to do harmful things. So, if the belief that homosexuality is an abomination destined to be punished by a wrathful God who finds it loathsome. Many, many millions of people believe this. They believe this because of their religious doctrines. They weren't born into this world believing it. This is an ideology that gets drummed into them early in life. If our religions were different, this belief would go away. If there were a line in the Bible which said, if all the homophobic passages of the Bible were removed and they were replaced by lines which said, well, men can love men and women can love women, we wouldn't have a problem with homophobia. So this is an ideology, and what it creates is this, just look at the results in our society. At the level of individuals, we have people by the millions who suffer total isolation in their communities, who are convinced that their parents and their friends will cease to love them if they knew they were gay. And even more horribly, they're right about that in many cases. And I hear from these people by the thousands in emails. So these are not parents who are disposed to hate their children. These are parents who have an ideology that causes them to hate their children in many cases, or to fear that their children are going to hell. So this destroys relationships, and then it also subverts our political discourse in ways that should otherwise be unthinkable. The fact that we have to argue about gay marriage and not talk about poverty or nuclear proliferation or climate change or anything else of great consequence. So we have to undermine the beliefs, and we also have to talk about the consequences of the needless complication that is occasioned by the beliefs. So that's really the two things I think that need to be focused on in order to undercut this. What would you say to a non-believer whose husband or wife or entire family is deeply religious? what can they do to mitigate all the conflict that arises at the boundary between belief and disbelief, especially when it comes to deciding how to raise children. So this is, again, this is something that I hear daily in my inbox. This is the people who either can't come out of the closet as non-believers or are out of the closet and then reaping the whirlwind of consequences for doubting God within a community where everyone believes. And the amount of anguish born of this is just amazing. Now, I haven't had this experience. I can't really advise people in any intelligent way based on my own direct experience. But I just think this is something, depending on the circumstance, this can be a deal breaker. It does end relationships. It does end marriages. Whether it needs to in every case, I certainly doubt. I mean, it's a matter of how tenaciously and dogmatically and intolerantly believers want to hold on to their certainty and insist that children be raised with a fear of hell, for instance. I mean, that would be a deal breaker for me. You know, the idea that to be with someone who insisted upon instilling in our child a fear of eternal torment in hell, you know, I view that as child abuse. So if that's the situation you're in, well, that's a problem, and I don't really have a magic bullet for fixing it. But there are many gradations of that, and clearly when the relationships matter enough and there's enough love and understanding there, enough goodwill, despite differences, then I think some of these impasses can be negotiated. But it's a huge and completely unnecessary problem. The alternative would be just to speak rationally and openly about what, in fact, we know about the nature of the universe, and to never hesitate to admit what we don't know. And that spirit of open-mindedness would just nullify all of these sectarian certainties of religion, and allow people to still explore whatever is there to be found in terms of spiritual life or mystical experience or anything else that could be actually of interest to people.
You know, from my point of view, it's impossible to ignore the influence of Islam. I mean, Islam is its own ideology and set of dogmatisms that are inflexible and at odds with the spirit of science fundamentally. And despite the fact that there was a brief period where there seemed to be some, happy convergence between scientific and mathematical insight and Islam, for the most part, Islam has been hostile to a real intellectual life, and in a way that Christianity was hostile even when the scientific worldview was struggling to be born in the 16th century and the 15th century. What we have historically is a real war of ideas, and I mean, it can be crystallized in the moment where Galileo was shown the instruments of torture and put under house arrest by people who refused to look through his telescope. Right? I mean, so that was the genius of religion paired with the emerging genius of science in that room.
Well, to be fair, I mean, Galileo was originally sponsored by the church, and so is Copernicus. But there's no question there was a backlash from the church to this stuff.
Yes, and the backlash makes sense because there is a intellectual progress on questions of how the cosmos is organized or where it came from or how life began. All of these questions are the scientific answers to which are in zero-sum contest with the doctrines found in the books. Now, it's true that there are religious people, and now even the Pope, who have relaxed their adherence to tradition enough to make room for something like evolution, right? But it is still a problem.
Not a super new idea. I mean, right? Aquinas was talking about this in the 13th century and 14th century. The idea that if it was in science and it was contradicted by the book, then you're misreading the book, right? I mean, that's a pretty old idea.
But that is to subvert science rather than the book in Aquinas' case. I mean, Aquinas thought heretics should be put to death, right? His argument for capital punishment for heresy, and Augustine made the same argument. Augustine thought they should be tortured, right? So that those two great lights of the Catholic Church gave us the Inquisition and gave us more than a century.
I think it's also fair to say that they were rather instrumental in the development of modern science. So the Dark Ages
No.
First of all, I think the Dark Ages are a bit of an exaggeration in terms of the Dark Ages themselves saw a massive growth in technology and architecture, for example. I mean, Gothic cathedrals are built during the Dark Ages. But,
sure.
But the
that's
scientific world is, well, virtually every major university in the Western world was sponsored by the Catholic Church. And I'm not a great Catholic defender, right? But virtually all major universities were sponsored by the Catholic Church, which saw consonance between science and religion as a reason to actually investigate the natural world.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's backwards. I think the reality is there was everything that was good that was done anywhere at any time prior to, pick your year, was done by some religious person. I mean, there was just nobody else to do the job, right? So you could make the argument that, Catholics built every bridge in Europe until the Protestants came around and they built their half of the bridges. I mean, so there was just no one else to do the job. And we're human beings who want to pursue various ends, many of which require breakthroughs in learning. So, engineering got born in a religious context. Physics was, the first physicists were people who were Christians, who were, we had, as is often pointed out, Newton spent half his time worrying about biblical prophecy. Now, I think that was an objective waste of his time. He also spent a lot of his time worrying about astrology, right? So you're trying to
alchemy.
This is actually an example from my book. Imagine your neighbor believes that he's got a diamond buried in his backyard that's the size of a refrigerator. Okay, and you ask him why. And he says things like, well, you don't understand. This diamond gives my life a lot of meaning. Or, my family loves the gatherings we have on the lawn digging this pit every Sunday. And are we going to take that away from us? Or imagine if he said, I wouldn't want to live in a universe where there wasn't a diamond buried in my backyard that's the size of a refrigerator. It's pretty clear, it's immediately clear that those responses would be inadequate. Deeply inadequate. Those really are the responses of a madman or an idiot. And yet, take the same kind of thinking into the religious domain, and these responses have immense prestige. In fact, unless you endorsed some thinking of that kind, you could not possibly get elected to political office in this country. Well, here is another myth. The idea that scientific rationality has nothing prescriptive to say about morality and human happiness. I mean, science, we are told, can help us get what we value, but it cannot tell us what we ought to value. I mean, many of us believe that we can scan people's brains while they make a variety of moral judgments, but we'll never be in a position to say what judgments they should have made. That is, what judgments are ethically normative. This is a myth, and we have exported this mythology to the culture at large. And now most people think that they are offered a forced choice between the law of God and something like moral relativism. And as a result, most people, even most scientists and secularists, have ceded all discussion about meaning and values and morality to the care of theologians and religious apologists, more or less without argument. And this is what has kept religion in such good standing, even while its authority has been battered and nullified on every other question of significance. Now, I'm convinced this has been a huge mistake, intellectually first, but also politically, morally, even spiritually. Once we understand human happiness, once we understand morality as being inextricable from happiness, not just human happiness, but the difference between happiness and suffering in conscious creatures like ourselves, then we see that it will be susceptible to empirical inquiry and rational discussion. I mean, are there objective facts to be known about the causes of human happiness? Surely there must be. I mean, it does not seem too soon to say that love is generally better than hate and compassion better than cruelty. I mean, it may be a very long time, as anyone in this room can appreciate, before we fully understand the basis for the deepest psychological well-being in terms of genes and social structures and economic systems, but it is not too soon to say that something like honor killing doesn't figure prominently in it.
I think it's a false fear, the idea that we wouldn't find any reason to build beautiful architecture or paint nice paintings, but for indulging certain religious superstitions. It's just not. It's. I think Feynman once wrote that he was a poor poet who must fall silent when he finds out that the sun is actually a massive sphere of hydrogen fusing into helium. I mean, it's not. The claim is that you have to take something on faith to be creative, and it's. I think it's a product of an argument that you used briefly early on, which is a fallacious one. This idea that the percentages of people who do these great, I think you used it in the connection
in terms of goodness, not in terms of art.
Yeah, in terms of goodness.
Right.
Most people.
Was it not fallacious in goodness?
Yeah.
I'm just
well, yeah,
curious.
no, it's
that
fallacious.
one too. Okay.
Most people are doing this good work are doing it for religious reasons. Well, most people, most of the time, have been religious throughout human history. There has been no one else to do the job. This is true.
Yeah.
I mean, most people who have plucked chickens have plucked them while believing in God. That does not mean you need to believe in God to pluck them.
The irony is that atheism is completely without content. It is not a philosophical position. And all religious people are atheists with respect to everyone else's religion. I mean, we're all atheists with respect to the thousands of dead gods who lie in that mass grave we call mythology. I mean, think of Thor and Isis and Zeus. You know, these were once gods in good standing among our ancestors. Everyone now rejects them. Well, actually, not everyone. I occasionally get hate mail from people who do believe in Zeus, but that's another story. But more importantly, every Christian rejects the claims of Islam, just as I do. You know, Muslims claim that they have the perfect word of the creator of the universe. Why do they believe this? Because it says so in the book. Sorry, not good enough. So this term atheism really is misleading. We're talking about specific truth claims and their evidence, or lack thereof. Now, what about the charge that atheism is dogmatic? Let's get this straight. Jews, Christians, and Muslims claim that their holy books are so profound, so prescient of humanity's needs, that they could have only been written by an omniscient being. An atheist is simply a person who has entertained this claim, read the books, and found the claim to be ridiculous. This is not dogmatism. There's nothing that an atheist needs to believe on insufficient evidence in order to reject the biblical God. What dogma have we all embraced to not take Apollo and Zeus into account as we go about our day? Would it be dogmatic to doubt that the Iliad or the Odyssey was dictated by the creator of the universe? The atheist is simply saying, as Carl Sagan did, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If ever there were an antidote to dogmatism, this is it. There's a related claim that atheists and scientists generally are arrogant. Now, this is rather ironic. The truth is that when scientists don't know something, like why the universe came into being or how the first self-replicating molecules formed on Earth, they tend to admit it. Pretending to know things you do not know is a profound liability in science. You get punished for this rather quickly. But pretending to know things you do not know is the lifeblood of faith-based religion. This is really one of the profound ironies of religious discourse, in the frequency with which you can hear religious people praise themselves for their humility while tacitly claiming to know things about cosmology and physics and chemistry and paleontology that no scientist knows. Any person who dignifies Genesis as an account of creation, or even as informative,
is essentially saying to someone like Stephen Hawking, Stephen, you're a smart guy, and I see you got a lot of equations over there, but you don't know enough about cosmology. It says here that God did this in 6 days and then rested on the seventh, and I don't see how you've really grappled with the nuances of the biblical account. This would be amusing if it were not having such a disastrous effect upon our public policy. It is impeding medical research and the teaching of science in this country. 30% of biology teachers in the United States at the high school level don't even mention evolution because of the hassle occasioned by the religious hysteria that it provokes in their students and their students' parents.